Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I know it's been a little bit since my last video, but I got sick this past week and so I did not have anything up. But today, I know it's a little late, we're going to be doing my picks for week 2 of the 2022 season. I'll do a quick little recap from week 1 since I didn't do one last week, or this past week because I was sick. So we'll do that real quick and then we'll jump into taking a look at week 2 and my picks for week 2. So real quickly, let me just throw up the picks from last week. You can see that I had an overall record of 9-4 and a big pick record of 0-2. Did not predict either of those matches right. The Outlaws and the Justice both performed better than I expected them to and took wins in the opening weekend. The other matches I predicted wrong were the two first matches on Sunday. Lowland Spitfire managed a win over the Titans, and the Florida Mayhem managed a win over the Paris Eternal. So, pretty good first weekend, all things considered. A lot of the matches went as we expected, but there were still some surprises, which was nice to see. So, there's the full picks from last week, if you want to see how I did last week. I'll try to make sure I have a video out this week to talk about next week to talk about my week 2 recap as we get into the APAC matches, of course, starting in week 3. So, we're getting closer to the full season having kind of begun, and a power rankings for the APAC region is due soon, so keep all that in mind. But with those week 1 recaps out of the way, I don't want to get too much into it because I want this video to be a little short since I'm still feeling some of those symptoms of me being sick. Let's jump in and let's take a look at my picks for week 2. And starting off with the first match from week 2, we have Friday's matches. The first match is the Florida Mayhem taking on the Vancouver Titans. Mayhem in a 1-1 week last week. Nice win over the Paris Eternal and a loss to the Atlanta Reign. Titans disappointed me last week. Like I said, I expect them to be able to beat the Spitfire, but the Spitfire completely rolled over the Titans. Pretty weak performance from the Titans in that series. Okay performance as the Uprising, but what is that type of the Uprising? What is the type of the Titans? It's hard to really say for sure. I think this match has the potential to be mildly close, but ultimately I think it will be a relatively one-sided score in favor of the Florida Mayhem. I think the Mayhem looked better last week. I think that they have a more talented roster. I feel more confident in their pieces and the players they have, and so I personally think the Mayhem will win this match. I'm going to go with a score of 3-1 in favor of the Florida Mayhem. Moving on to the second game on Friday. My first big pick game of the week. I think this match is the potential to be a banger. A rematch of one of the biggest matches from 2021. The Houston Outlaws taking on the San Francisco Shock. Now both these teams are very different from last season. The Shock, of course, letting go of pretty much everybody from last year's roster. The Outlaws only holding on to 2 pieces from last year's roster. So very different rosters. Outlaws had a big win over Dallas in week 1. Shock had 2 wins over 2 pretty middling or weak teams in the Paris Eternal and the London Spitfire. So we don't really know for sure yet what the Shock are. We've seen them play against 2 pretty weak teams. The Outlaws play against 2 good teams. So really this one is tough to call for sure. I think it is going to be a big match because this is the first time the Shock are playing a real opponent who has shown, really good potential. And it'll really be the first test for this Shock roster to see how good they truly are. They look really good, and I just don't feel very confident in them. But I think this will be a very, very close match. Could go either way. But I do think that the Shock showed me more in week 1 that I think they are the team to beat going into this weekend. So I'm going to pick the Shock to win this one. I'm going with a score of 3-2. I think it'll be good. I think it'll be close. I really think the DPS matchup is going to be interesting to see. I think how Kalyuj on the tank role stacks up against some of the other potential tank options on Houston, whether it's Dante, whether it's Piggy. It'll be interesting to see. Both these teams are very, very similar kind of breakdowns, where they have 1 tank and it's an off tank. They have 2 flex supports. They have DPS, and so I just think these 2 teams are very, very similar, but I just feel more confident in what the Shock have put together, so I'm going to pick them 3-2 for this one. Final match on Friday is the Washington Justice and the Atlanta Reign. This is an interesting match because this is, of course, the arguable best team in the Western region in the Atlanta Reign, taking on a Washington Justice team that did have a win over a good Defiant team, but also lost to Dallas this past weekend. So there's a lot of things to kind of look at with these two teams. The Reign didn't play any incredible opponent. They played New York and they played Florida, were both decent opponents, but not great opponents. The Justice played two higher level opponents. So this will be the biggest challenge for both of these teams, I think. But the Justice have played a lot closer to their own level than the Reign have so far this season. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how these teams match up. But I think the Reign look really good right now. I think that Nero had an incredible opening weekend. I thought OG and Ultraviolet in particular, looked amazing. Hawk had a great weekend, so I feel very confident in the Reign to take this series over the Justice, and I'm going to give it to the Reign in a score of 3-1. I actually think they look better right now than the Justice, and so I'm going to go in favor of the Reign for this one. Moving on to Saturday, it's the Boston Uprising taking on the London Spitfire. Two teams pretty low in the standings right now. Both of them did manage a win in Week 1, but neither of them were too impressive as a whole. This is a tough one to pick. Arguably could be a big pick game, but these two teams are really bad and I didn't want to make it a big pick game. So it is definitely close. I think these two teams are very interesting. Boston, it really is about their switching. I don't know what they're going to do. They don't really have an identity right now. Do they play NYXL? Do they play Punk? Do they play Marvel? They seem to favor Punk in Week 1, but I don't know for sure. They played Crimzo a lot, but they played MCD a little bit. I don't know what this team is doing. I don't know what their identity is. London does have an identity. They are really good at Rush. They're going to put Hadi on the Rhine when they can, and they're going to run it down mid and play to their strengths. That can work sometimes. But we don't know for sure kind of where either of these teams are at right now. I think London has a more solid identity. I know what they are more, but I still like Boston as a talented roster more. They struggled a bit against Vancouver, and London handled them pretty convincingly, so I definitely could see a world where London wins this series in a dominant fashion. If we're going to kind of use that rule of, they have a shared common opponent and you kind of compare their performances. But I do think that that is not a perfect way to go about it, and so I think London is not going to take this series. I think Boston is still the stronger team. I think that they should win this one. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a 3-2 win for the Boston Uprising, but I do think it is going to go in their direction in this match. The next match on Saturday is the LA Gladiators taking on the Dallas Fuel. This is my second big pick game for the week. This is two giants of this North American region going up against each other. This is a really tough one to pick. The LA Gladiators this past weekend didn't play the strongest opponents. They played the NYXL, and they played... I am drawing a blank on the other team they played. Mayhem? I think. Regardless, the performance from them, Boston, that's who they played. They played Boston. They played two relatively weak teams. And so their performance, though relatively dominant, they didn't look amazing. They didn't look like the most coordinated team ever. Dallas had a 1-1 weekend. They got rolled by the Outlaws, and then they rolled the Justice. So the Fuel, we've seen that kind of pendulum swing from a struggle against the Outlaws to a really good match against the Justice. Gladiators have been a little iffy. They've looked good, and they've looked talented. They just haven't looked as coordinated. So this will be a very close match. These are two really good teams. These are my top two teams in the Western region in my power rankings at the beginning of the season. So this is a matchup that I think should be a really good one. I feel like I almost have to make the pick I'm going to make because I was singing their praises so much in the preseason, and I would be a hypocrite if I went against the LA Gladiators in this one. I think it'll be close. I definitely think that right now, if the Fuel have a chance of winning any matchup between these two teams this season, this is the one they are most likely to win. Because I think right now, the Gladiators are at their weakest, because the Gladiators, I think, will take some time before they really hit their peak, like they did last season. So I think right now it is going to be a very, very close matchup. I think it could go either way. But I'm going to ride with the Gladiators because I have been singing their praises all season and all off season. So I'm going to go with the Gladiators to win this one 3-2. I think they're just slightly better right now. And so I think it goes their way. Could go the other way. I think it's close. But right now I'm going with the Gladiators to take this one 3-2. Final match on Saturday is one I have my eyes on for a very specific reason. It is the New York Excelsior taking on the Vancouver Titans. And this is a very interesting match because the New York Excelsior, if they beat the Vancouver Titans, would become the 5th team in the Overwatch League to have beaten all 19 other teams in the league. To my knowledge, they would be joining the LA Valiant, the San Francisco Shock, the Philadelphia Fusion, and the Los Angeles Gladiators as the other teams to have beaten all of the teams in the league. The Vancouver Titans could do it as well this season if they beat the Washington Justice. That's the only team they've never beaten. But there's a huge matchup potentially for the New York Excelsior to finally potentially be one of those teams that's beaten everybody else in the league. New York still to this day has the best win percentage in Overwatch League history. They still have the highest win percentage. The Shock are right on their tails, but the NYXL, all things considered, have the most winningest record of all time. But they've still never beaten the Titans. So it's a really interesting matchup when you think about how good New York has been historically. You think about the Titans in 2019, and then you think about the fact that these two teams have just been separated now for basically 3 years. They haven't played in 3 years. So they don't have a lot of experience. They've only played 3 times historically. And the Titans won all 3 of them. And so it'll be a fun matchup in that regard. And I think right now we're at this weird point where both of these teams don't look very good right now. Both of these teams look kind of low in the overall grand scheme of things. And so that's why I have my eyes on this match. It's going to be interesting. Of course, I'm an NYXL fan, so I'm a little biased, but I think it'll be an interesting match for that reason. It'll be curious to see if we get that kind of historical moment for the NYXL. I'm going to pick the NYXL to win this one, not just because of the potential for them to have beaten a team they've never beaten before, but I like them better right now. They had a tough week 1. They had to play the Gladiators, they had to play the Reign, they had to play 2 of the best teams in the league. That's hard. So I think they should be the Titans. I don't think it'll be particularly close. It could be. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to give the Titans a map, but I'm going to go 3-1 in favor of the NYXL to take this one over the Titans. All right, moving on to Sunday, we have the Florida Mayhem taking on the Houston Outlaws. This one, interesting match. I don't really know what to expect from either of these teams right now. Like I said, Houston, big win over the Fuel, and then a loss to the Toronto Defiant, so they're kind of a question mark right now, but I think they do look to be a pretty solid team. Mayhem had a tough loss to the Reign, but bounced back and looked very good against the Paris Eternal, other than the fact that they did the illegal maneuver, but we don't need to talk about that. So to me, it'll be interesting to see what happens in this matchup because I'm curious to see if Florida is able to punch up as much as we think they might be able to, or if Houston is really as strong as you think they are. It'll be interesting to see how Houston bounces back, of course, from the performance against the Shock as well. But I think it's a very interesting matchup here. I think it'll be pretty close. I think both these teams are very good, and I think they're kind of close together in terms of their overall performances. I'm going to give the edge to the Outlaws. I'm going to say it's a 3-2 win for the Outlaws. I think they're better right now. They look to be better right now, and so I think they are going to take this one. 3-2 scoreline from me for this one in favor of the good old Houston Outlaws. Up next, we have the New York Excelsior taking on the San Francisco Shock, the 2 teams with the highest winning percentages in the history of the Overwatch League, regular season that is. If we only include regular season, no playoff or anything like that. Important caveat there. These 2 teams have also not played in a long time. I believe they haven't played since 2019. The lower bracket finals in the playoffs was a 3-0 victory or 4-0 victory. 3-0 victory for the Shock last time the 2 teams played. Back then, that was a good New York Excelsior roster. They were the 3rd overall team in the league. And they've been on their descent kind of since then. So I I think these two teams are in pretty opposite corners right now. Really tough start to the season for the New York Excelsior, having to play arguably the three best teams in the Western region in their first 4 matches. They do get to play the Titans at least. But a tough opening 2 weeks for the NYXL, and I don't think this one is going to go their way either, unfortunately. And the Shock are too good right now. Even if they have to play the Outlaws, I still think it's going to be a pretty easy win for the Shock. Over the New York Excelsior, I'm going in the favor of the Shock, 3-0. Pains me to do this, but I think the Shock take this one. Fun fact about the Shock, though, they've only ever beaten the NYXL one time. That one time that they played in the playoffs in 2019. So one time the Shock have beaten New York, but I don't think that's going to be the case anymore after this weekend. Final match of the weekend is the Toronto Defiant against the Paris Eternal. Paris Eternal did make a big move earlier this week, adding Wub to their lineup, another DPS player. I think it helps the roster a lot, but I don't think it's enough to make them an incredibly better roster, but I think it does help them, rounds out a lot of their flexibility, makes them more well-rounded. So I think it does make this a more complete Paris Eternal team, and I think it will be a huge upgrade for them in the long term. But I don't think it is enough to necessarily make them all of a sudden an immediate favorite against the Defiant. I think it'll be pretty close. I think these are two teams that are pretty good. I think the Defiant showed how good they were this past weekend when they beat Houston. I think the Defiant are a good team. I think they're a solid team. I think they are pretty solidly top 6, at least in this region. And I think they will have a lot of those shots at a lot of those tournaments. And so for me, got to give it to the Defiant in this one. 3-1 for them. And it'll be close, but I do think the Defiant ultimately will be the team to take it away. Anyway, that is it for this week for my picks. Throw the whole list of them up here so you can see them all real quick. But let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on the matches this week. If you agree with me, you disagree with me, whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. But that is going to be it for me for today. I apologize for this video up late. This video has been rough for me to make, even just making it. I'm still trying to recover from being sick, so I will try to get back to my regular schedule next week. But no promises right now. I'll do as much as I can to kind of be up to full strength again. But it may take me a couple more days before I'm feeling fully 100% again. So thank you for bearing with me, sticking with me. Hopefully by at least week 3, things will be back to normal. But we'll see what happens. That's going to be all for me for today. Hope you're all staying safe. Staying healthy, of course. I did a pretty bad job at that this week, but you guys can do a better job than me. If you enjoyed this video, want more like in the future, consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, bye-bye.